Right, welcome to today's stream, GraphCMS. We are live talking about union types. My name is Jonathan. I'm on the developer advocacy team here at GraphCMS and joined by my colleague and good friend, Jamie. How's it going, Jamie?
Bad. Hi everyone, I'm Jamie, one of the developer advocates here at GraphCMS. Like Jonathan says, we're going to be talking about GraphQL union types. Pretty much throughout this video is just going to kind of go over some examples where and when you may use GraphQL union types. And Jonathan has been working on a fancy new demo that I'm excited to see because I've not seen this yet, and I'm really curious to see how GraphCMS and how GraphQL union types work together. So, yeah, the floor is yours, Jonathan.
Sure. So I guess firstly would be a good kind of starting point to talk about union types in GraphCMS. They are somewhat of a new feature. We recently relaunched the GraphCMS product, the new version of the product in April, and union types is kind of like one of the headline features of that release that everyone was really excited about. Me in particular, Jamie definitely. Um, so yeah, I mean we've introduced them. They're obviously a kind of a first class citizen in the GraphQL world. So to have them now inside of GraphCMS is really powerful. It kind of gives you a lot more control over your schema creation rather than kind of having to bloat your schema in particular contexts. So you've been working with the unit types recently, right?
Yeah, I've recently been having a look at how we can really leverage GraphQL union types in from the CMS to kind of just power and programmatically build pages, and more specifically pages with forms. So I wrote a tutorial. I don't know if you have the link open, but tutorial I wrote on Dev 2 showing how you can use Next.js and GraphQL to build forms, really any type of form you want, as long as the developer would create all of the work to programmatically build the form. They can then just hand that over to users of the CMS to build new pages, to create pages with forms, and then assign field to forms. So this tutorial really goes into all of the detail. It kind of shows you the kind of fields you can add, and as an example, it shows how you can reorder fields. So you've really got all of the power, and thanks to GraphQL and GraphCMS union types, now it's available. Those GraphQL union types just allow us to kind of show any type of field and kind of make the same queries against all of those fields. And depending on the type, it can then infer which field type or React component or Vue component to display on the page. So I'm really excited by GraphQL union types having arrived in GraphCMS when we relaunched earlier this year. It was something that has enabled developers just to write less boilerplate code. It wasn't
Right.
impossible to do before, but I think now it's just obviously it's part of the GraphQL spec, and and they're natively supported now. It's a first class citizen, like you
Yeah.
say. It's just a lot easier, I think.
Right. So obviously, the beauty of GraphQL union types inside of GraphCMS inside of your project is that they are then generated automatically as part of your schema. So we've got the nice UI to quickly we'll dive in a bit here. We've got the fields by which we can create a reference, and what we actually have now. Oh, still dragging that, like in the old UI. Now you just click it. Yes, what we got is a new reference field, and now you'll notice here is this new checkbox which will allow us to potentially reference multiple models, and there you see the union type. So what we do, if we check that, we can then kind of add these multiple models here that we can then connect when creating a new entry for that model.
And that's
Um,
all it took was clicking that box and choosing the models.
right,
Right.
yeah,
That's all. That's the magic there.
exactly. And kind of, we'll come back to that example that schema is for in a bit. But as I said, by creating that field, you get the schema, the union types are generated for you automatically. And that's kind of the beauty of using GraphCMS, GraphQL native CMS. You get all of this goodness out of the box for little work. So tell me a bit about this query here, Jamie. We're just looking at the form field query on the page. I guess this right here is this is the union type. This is how we actually declare which fields we
Yeah.
want for a specific model, right?
Yeah, so we're just spreading onto, if people are familiar with using fragments, this is the syntax here is awfully familiar. We're just spreading onto the character or the input or whatever it be in your database. In this in the GraphCMS, in the specific example here, we're spreading on the form input, we're spreading on the text area, and then we're spreading on the form checkbox and various other things. And what we can do then is, once we spread onto that, we can then select the fields, and we can do all the other things that we know and love of GraphQL. So we could spread onto form input, and we could alias name to be title or whatever, or ID. So we've got the full power of GraphQL, and we can just spread onto those. And essentially, that's the union type syntax. If people aren't familiar with that, this is kind of what it looks like, and those who are will be happy that it's just regular old GraphQL that you're used to. That's completely possible to use with GraphQL as well.
Yeah, and we'll
And
see.
then
Yeah, the response here. We're looking at the query here for fields, obviously spreading
yeah,
in the union type there, and you can see that that type name is returned in there, and then those fields are in some cases unique to that specific type.
right.
So
Yeah,
are you
the
using
type
that?
name. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. So later on in the tutorial, that type name, it's you don't need to query that. That will just be inferred depending on what you spread on. But we're using this because we actually want to get that type name back. So inside of React, we can then import all of our components, our form components or form
Yeah.
fields, whatever we want to call them. And then based on that type name, we could just do some fancy JavaScript to kind of pluck the component from an array of imports or something. So, or an object of imports, and then we can render that to the UI. So it's kind of if you do have a look at the code, and I'll leave a comment in the description. I'll put one in the chat in just a sec to view this code. But if you go through and have a look at that, you can see exactly how that's working. It's just a few little fancy things with JavaScript that we can make that experience a lot nicer. And using GraphQL union types, there's very little code, if I'm honest,
Yeah.
to make this work, which is the mind-blowing thing. It's
Yeah,
really, really.
that's the I've been kind of exploring that pattern as well in my example, which is using union types, which we'll come to in a bit, and it's kind of building one of the kind of key requests that we see from a lot of people looking to use GraphCMS is they want to be able to kind of compose pages using UI blocks or components from inside the CMS. Now, whilst we don't have that visual representation of a page inside of the CMS, you can quite easily
Yeah,
use union types with your favorite front end language or framework, whether it's React, Vue, to actually use those union types to render specific components. I think we should have a look at. We'll dive into the CMS a bit and kind of figure
yeah,
out how we use union types inside of the CMS. So this right now is a project for the what is an upcoming demo or an upcoming template for GraphCMS, and this is it's meant to be a SaaS marketing site. So this is still a
Sassy.
work in progress. Yeah, sassy. So this is still a work in progress. But basically, what we're kind of looking to do is, as I said before, is pass the power of page creation to the CMS rather than that being inside of the code base. So we want to be able to empower content creators to fire up a new page for a new feature or a new page for a contact form using also Jamie's post on the form fields with union types as well. So we want to kind of be able to create a schema that will enable us to do that. I'm just poking around the schema here. The base kind of model in all of this is the page. So we have some kind of really generic fields here. We got the title. We got the slug, which is actually used to kind of create the page and the path for that page inside of our application. What I'm interested in down here is this blocks field. As you can see, it's a reference, so it's a reference to another model, but it also accepts multiple values, and we can see those values there, hero and grid currently. So what that means is we're essentially we're going to use this blocks field to uh, compose our page using other models inside of the CMS. And a model in this instance doesn't necessarily have to be a data input. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to data. It could be a UI element that accepts certain fields.
So that could be, you've got, what do you have there? You have hero and grid, and obviously you'll know what that may look like when you move on to that part of the demo. But already my mind's thinking, well, these blocks build up a page, right? So you could have like a horizontal rule, for example, could be a model type.
Yeah, yeah.
It may be something else, but that shows the power. You can kind of use UI and use union types to kind of draw the page. And I'm excited to see the output here. I've not seen it yet.
Right. So yeah, I mean, and you kind of touched on this in the in your reference here about how being able to reorder these fields, and then actually the order that they're in the CMS is actually reflected in the response from the API and from the query. And that's really powerful because that essentially is going to allow us to reorder what the page looks like or how these blocks are returned and how we can then render them in our application. So we're just looking at a page here inside of this project. This is the home page. We've got a title there, subtitle using the rich text editor. So this will be returned in Markdown for us to render. And then we've got the block section here. So this is the actual UI blocks that are going to compose our page. So I'm able to reorder these as Jamie kind of alluded to. And what that, as I said, that will affect the response of the query. So if we just jump into, actually, I'm just going to save it and publish that. So if we just jump into the API playground here, we're going to write a query. At the moment, I'm getting every page, but I just want to get the home page here. All right, so here we've written our query here. Some kind of generic string fields. Our banner, which is again is a reference field to another model. I'm just going to go ahead and collapse that for now. We're interested in this blocks piece here. So as you can see, it's kind of similar to the query that Jamie had in his article. We're spreading in the model name with the union type syntax. And we're also kind of requesting other fields in there, like an ID. And what you'll notice as well is that inside of this particular one, so for example, the grid example that the grid relation that we've got, the grid model, we also have another field which is columns, and again, that is another union type field. I think I've jumped ahead of myself a bit, so I'm actually just going to slow back down. The blocks, we'll just come back to the blocks here. What I was talking about was obviously the reordering of that. So as you can see, I've fired my request, and it doesn't necessarily matter which way you write these, which way you order these union type syntaxes in the query. They will be returned by what's in the CMS. So if I go ahead, at the moment you can see the grid is returned. The first two are grid type names. And the last is the hero. Now that will reflect the page that we were just looking at. And I'll just go ahead and update it again just so you can see that. So generally, a hero would exist at the top of the page. So we want to bring that back up there. We might have a feature grid beneath that, and then the blog grid at the bottom. So I'll update that there. Yes, I want to publish those. Let's go back to our playground, and we're going to run the same query again. It's going to strip these fields out as we don't really not bothered about those currently. All right, so you'll notice that the blocks response has actually updated based on the work, the change that we just made in the CMS. We're now getting the hero, block back at the top. So what that means is actually in the code now we've actually got an array of blocks that's actually sorted as per the order of the page that we want.
Mhm.
Now, previously, that again, this is a new feature. Sortable relations is a new feature in the newer GraphCMS. And previously, you had to kind of do a workaround where you would be perhaps have an integer
Integer on the
field,
field.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you would you'd run a query that would order by that field.
Yeah. So
So
it's
now we've
just
got
far, it's
that.
just a lot more easier. It's far easier for devs just to kind of get going. The dev experience here is much, much better. And we spent a lot of time, the whole team spent a lot of time and energy on making small improvements like this that really just improve the overall experience of using the product. So this is one little thing that I always get excited every time I use it, because it's just a simple thing of ordering something. I don't have to manage that logic myself. I know my content team can come in, reorder things, and that reflects any UI that touches. So it's very cool.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of the real power of this is that they don't have to worry about a certain order field having a larger value than another block. They can just kind of use that drag and drop interface now to return the order of the page blocks as they need. So let's go ahead and actually kind of dive into. Oops, wrong way. Let's go ahead and dive into the code for this application that I've been working on. This is a Next.js app. So we're using, this is React, using Next.js with static page generation. So that will kind of build our pages for us at build time, running queries. We get static pages back. Obviously, that's in production right now. We're just running it in development. So what that looks like is, if I go to index page here, you'll notice we're using kind of the GraphQL client here. Won't get into this too much. This is just using GraphQL requests. It's a pretty straightforward GraphQL client library. Doesn't really offer a cache or anything. It's just going to fire a request for us and return the results that we need. That's fine because we're kind of doing this statically. So just jumping back into here, we're actually kind of running our request, which again is pretty similar to what we've just been looking at in the API playground there. You can see we're looking for a page with a particular slug passed from a variable. We're querying for the blocks, and we want all of the subsequent fields related to certain union types. So in this query, it's important to note that you will have to for when you're building a page, you'll have to specify every potential union type on there, even if that page does not include it. That's in this case, that's because I'm using kind of a single query for every page, and as well, that's kind of like a fallback measure in that you will always request for every type, even if it's not included, just in case that somebody has included that kind of content on a page. Does that make sense, Jamie?
Yeah, yeah, it makes total sense. That's really, yeah.
All right, cool. So if we go back to our next page, we're using get static props again. This is a Next.js lifecycle function, which will basically run this query for us at build time and will allow us to build this page. Now, what's important here is there's not much here other than this wrapper component. So we just dive into this wrapper component. This is where the magic kind of happens. So we've passed in the page response that's come back from our GraphCMS request. And then in there, we're actually destructuring the fields that we're interested in. And in particular is the blocks. Now, Jamie, you touched on this, and it's important to note that this is how we will actually render things on the page for certain blocks that are in the CMS.
Yeah.
The way that that is done, and again, you talked about this, and it's actually surprisingly straightforward, is we're actually just importing a number of React components. We're importing a number of React components that resolve to certain file from that type name. So if you remember, if we just quickly jump back into here, our type name is derived from our model name. So we have the banner model, we have the hero model, we have the grid model in particular. Those two are interested in there. Go dive back here. There you see the type name. So we're actually going to use that field to resolve to a component. And this is kind of how it looks just by that simple component there will resolve to this page. So what you can see is we have our hero component here. We have our what we call a grid here, and then it's rendering other components inside of that, which we'll come back to. And then we've got a blog grid at the bottom here.
Yeah.
And so we're using some Tailwind UI here, which is a really nice
very
UI library.
I really like it.
Just because I'm not a designer, and Tailwind team have done a great job with some nice components just to kind of copy and paste essentially. So thanks for that, Tailwind. But yeah, so what we've got is that page just from this component. Now we have to kind of dive deeper into this a little bit more and really look at the blocks here. So within each block, we've got that type name field, and what we're saying is the component prop or the component constant is going to resolve to the type name imported from our blocks constant here. If that doesn't resolve to anything, then we're just going to not return anything. Otherwise, return that component and then spread the rest of the props in. So in this case, if we look into blocks here, you'll see we're importing a couple of the components here. So in particular, we're looking at this hero here. And then what we've got is all of these fields that are returned from the hero are then kind of rendered inside of our component. So we've got the title there. We're using Markdown to parse the rich text from the CMS so that we get these links and things. It's pretty cool. Again, buttons. So we're able to just kind of throw buttons into the hero and they'll map to a component. And we'll just look at that in the CMS. What that looks like.
It'd be interesting to see that, because that having a hero is okay, and maybe he's giving the hero a title, description, an image, and obviously GraphCMS supports asset uploads, so you could, essentially that's given the whole power to the content editor. You can go in, you can add the title for the hero, the subtitle perhaps, and then you can go as far as uploading the image. I'm really curious to see how those buttons work and are they a relation as well. It looks to be that it's another relation, which is very, very cool. So you go another level deeper.
Yeah, it's pretty deep. Yeah, so there is a buttons field on the hero, which is a relation to a button model that we've got here, and that's all really on there is label. Slug, which is kind of, we use that as a unique identifier. It's not really used anywhere, but it's just a way to identify that button inside of the CMS. A href, so the buttons will link off to a page, be that internally or externally. And then this style enum, which essentially is what's responsible for dictating the style of the buttons, because you'll see we actually have so you'll see in here we are using the prop from the CMS, and we're just kind of we've built like a dictionary here for button classes, which is just resolving to Tailwind classes, and then that's kind of applied using class names. It's all kind of this is where, as a team, you would actually need to go ahead and build all these components up front. Your front end team or your engineering team would need to build all these components up front to get that freedom and control for your content team. So there is a bit of buy-in required up front. Just taking a drink, one sec.
Yeah, of course. You have to kind of create those components to be able to place them on the page. But once you've kind of created those components, they're widely accessible and available for anyone using the CMS to add to their page and build pages as they want. So if there's somebody in the team who isn't a developer, they can use the CMS and without touching the code at all, spin up a new page, add these components to the page, upload any images, create those buttons with different colors, and really have a really nice page without doing anything because these components have been built. And that's kind of the power of headless CMS as well, is
Yeah.
not just integrating with all these other platforms and building the solution you want. It's just being able to do the little simple things in the CMS, but really all of the other logic on the developer side can just be kind of done once or twice, and that's reusable across anywhere you specify. Which is really, really powerful.
Yeah, so on the topic of kind of going deep with these relations and these union type fields, interestingly, the grid is one that is used a couple times on this main page. So as I said, we've got the feature grid here, which is highlighting a couple of features inside of our application. And we've also got the latest posts coming from the blog here. So what's interesting is that's actually another union types field on the grid model, and it's called columns. And at the moment, that can map to either a feature or a blog post model. And we can have multiple values. So again, that looks just like the other query. As you can see here, we're on the grid, our grid block, and inside of there we've got multiple columns, and they can have different types. So if it's a blog post, we want all these fields that are related to our blog post model: authors, content, the cover image for the post, the title, published date. However, if it's a feature, then we need the image, the slug, the title, and the content. So yeah, we're kind of using these union types to further nest inside of a union type field, and it's kind of, I suppose you could kind of endlessly do this, but there's a cost to that. So don't get too carried away with these queries. The more kind of nested inside of your query, the slower the performance will be.
Yeah.
So this is a nice example, because what it essentially allows us to do is to kind of build this grid schema, which gives us kind of complete control over how our grid might look. So you'll notice this grid has 3 columns wide, but this grid is it's a single column grid, and we've got a
That's
field
cool.
to control that,
Cool.
an integer field
Yeah.
to control that. We also have a theme field, which will kind of theme the grid. So you can see we've got a kind of darker grey background here as opposed to the white of that one.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, but the columns is the interesting one. So we've got a feature and a blog post relation there. That's really what we're looking at next, is inside of this grid component, we're destructuring the columns. And what I see is we're doing, this looks very familiar because that's basically what's inside of our wrapper. Again, we're mapping over our columns array. We are looking up the component from an import,
Yeah.
and returning that and passing it the props to render.
Very, very cool indeed.
I did
That
something a little
whole,
different. Sorry, go on.
yeah, that control over the background, the column size, the width of all of that, being able to do that in the CMS is awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to kind of, get my hands on this and try it out in some of my examples. It's really cool.
Yeah. So as you said there, the width of the that's returned from the grid in the CMS determines how many columns that we show, and we're using CSS grid here, that resolves a function which will just return. Again, Tailwind classes, big fan of Tailwind. It's all over this app. So that's pretty cool. So we can kind of target how wide we want our columns, how many columns we want on each grid. But But did you notice this is a little different from our wrapper?
Yes. What's going on there?
Right. So this is where I started to get a little advantageous. Yeah. So I've actually added a component field to um, to our grid model now. So, oh no, sorry. Yes, here. Now, as I said before, what will happen normally inside of here is that we will just look up for an import or a component using the type name field. And in that case, that means if you aren't importing a component for button, or you aren't importing a component for feature, which relates to the model name, then it'll just kind of return nothing. So what I want to do is the creativity to actually say, well, yes, this is a feature, but what if I want to use a different component in certain instances where I'm actually showing that data? So that's why I added this component field, and essentially that will be an override for the type name if provided. So what that looks like, again, it's just the string. And if we go to our grids, we've got, so we look at this home blog grid, which is this one here. Now, normally, as you can see, the columns resolve to a blog post. So that means that inside of our application, we're going to look up for a component named blog post, but we don't have one. What we do have, though, is we have a blog post card. So if I remove this, this is where the stream falls down and we start to actually do some coding. That should have reloaded. So if I remove that line now, this grid will only look up for components that resolve to the type name. So in theory, it's going to look for
Don't do it. Don't code live.
yeah. So in this case, for the blog grid, it's essentially looking up that. Now we know that doesn't exist, so we're not going to actually get a grid, and I will prove that. As you can see, our grid has vanished. Our cards are gone; they're not there anymore because we don't have a blog post component. That's where that line comes in, and that gives content creators. Just undo all this. And that gives content creators the power to actually define how a piece of data should be represented on the front end using a field in the CMS.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right. So how do we?
Gives you a bit more power.
Exactly. Yeah. And again,
So
you have to kind of. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what is next for this specific example you have? There's a hero, there's that grid and blog. You don't have to add it to this down. How could people take this and move on to the next thing? What could they potentially add? Obviously, if anyone wants to contribute to it, then we'd greatly appreciate that. But what kind of things would be first on your mind if you were to take this? Just very quickly, what things could you add that could be powered by the CMS?
Right, yeah. And as I said, this isn't finished yet. There's still some things that myself and Ronak are working on. And I think the most glaringly obvious thing that's missing currently is there's no navigation. Actually, get away around the pages. There's no nav at the top. Close that. So yes, we can click around to different pages, but there's no nav to get back. You'll notice that the page is a bit slow. That's because we're running next dev, which essentially runs that query every time we load the page, just so we're sure we've got the freshest data. But it's a lot faster in production. So yeah, I mean, I think I want to add a navigation. I'm going to add some testimonial. I'm going to add like a testimonial slider component down here. So I'll read data again from the CMS. There'll be some testimonials in the CMS, and then we'll render those using a kind of a slider, some kind of slider component. But yeah, I think really the coolest thing is to kind of just create a page. So we could just kind of, I suppose we could build a page right now. Should we do that?
Go on
Let's
before
build
we
a new
wrap up.
page. Such a rebel. Okay, so yeah,
Wasn't
we're in this. Yeah, this is where it falls down. Right, so we're in the CMS. We're looking at the page models. We're going to create a new page. Let's create a features page. All features. Features. So the slug again is used for the path that's built from Next.js. So that will build this page at /features. We've got a rich text field for the hero, the subtitle of the hero, all the awesome features you could ever want. I'm going to just bold that because I just can. All right, so we need to add some blocks because right now our page would have nothing. In fact, what we'll do is we will save and publish this. And now I should have a /features. All right, so we got a page. It didn't 404, but there's nothing there. That's because we haven't added any blocks. So generally a page will have a hero. So we're going to create a new hero. We're going to say features hero. This slug is just a way to identify them. It's human readable rather than a UUID. We're going to add an asset. Let's go ahead and add this one. We're going to add a button as well. Let's add a try GraphCMS button. All right. Save and publish. So that entry is created. It's attached here in our blocks for our new page. So I'm just going to go ahead and save and publish that. If I refresh this now, I should have a hero. Yay!
Hey.
There you go. So we've got our new page, we've got our hero on our new page just from the CMS because of the foundation of the work that we've put into our application and the power of the queries, the power of GraphQL with union types and so on. So we're going to go ahead and keep adding to this. We're going to add another block. I'm going to add a feature grid.
So one thing you did there when you obviously click to add a new document type is it gives you the option of the different union types that are available in there, which is very cool. You can just add the text and kind of click on that and go.
Exactly, yes, and that can be updated. The page schema. So if we look at the page schema or blocks fields, you can see right now it only has two options. If I wanted to add some more, we could just add them here. So maybe I'd want a testimonial or something like that. So that can be updated. Yeah. You can remove these as well. So obviously, as your project grows, don't worry about having to, kind of rewrite that. You can just update it as it goes. Let's just dive back into our features page. I'm going to add a new grid. So awesome. I'm really terrible with copy.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Are you proud of me, Roro?
Roro, yes. He will be proud. Ronak will be proud of all the work you've done on this. Proud, in fact. Very, very cool.
So we have a theme field, which is enumeration to different values. We're going to use the dark one, and I'll come back to that in a second. Features, we're going to have, again, this is the width of the grid. So this is how many columns are on each row. We're going to have two. What we need to do then is actually is add some existing documents, features. We'll just link a couple of these. We're going to actually create a new one, new feature, feature 5. This was, or Jonathan was 2020. Create a new asset. And I've done some homework and I've been on Unsplash.
You're
So
prepared.
credits to Unsplash artist that I've forgotten the name of. I'm sorry.
We'll leave it in the show notes.
City at Night. Just give that a title because we're all about accessibility. So we're going to publish that asset. Now it's attached to our feature here. So I'm going to save that feature. As you can see, we're still within our grid that we're actually adding the features to. I'm going to save and publish this. If we dive back to our page, we should refresh now and have a grid. No, we don't. Oh dear, it's gone wrong. I didn't publish, did I? I mustn't have published. I mustn't have published. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, okay, cool.
All right, so what you'll notice is we have the two columns here that we wanted, the width. We've got our new line that we just added, but we don't have our dark background. That's because I haven't added it in the class here. So we've just got a basic switch statement that you reads the theme prop, which is from the CMS. So just going to add new case here, dark, which is an enum value in the CMS. Obviously, they can be updated.
Yeah. Yeah, and that those enum values in the CMS and the code here is something that a developer would do at build when they're building the project, and it's not something the content editor would ever have to do because they would just choose the predefined values. So what you're showing here is kind of both sides. You're showing how you can create the page with the content editing, and then you're showing as a developer how you can kind of interpret those values to update and customize the layout.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so there doesn't look so great, but that is, that's controlled by the CMS. So what I can say, hey, that actually doesn't look so good. I want to update my features grid. I want to actually just have the light theme, if that's all right. I'm just going to save and update that. Just refresh this page, and we will have a lighter themed grid. There you go. Pretty awesome. Cool. So if you actually we're using Next.js in this example. Our colleague Jesse has actually kind of been working with Vercel, who built and maintained Next.js, and obviously they have their deployment service, which is really awesome. He's been working with their platform to showcase how you can do preview builds with your GraphCMS project. So if you were to pair what Jesse's done for the preview stuff, and if you were to pair that with this work for a SaaS marketing site, that in essence means that you can, as a content editor, you can have previews of your brand new pages without having to run it locally, which is obviously what I'm doing. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
No, I like that. Sorry, very, very flexible. GraphQL union types allow us to create all these wonderful things. Not just GraphQL union types, but the whole ecosystem around developer tooling these days. You're using Next.js, which you didn't do anything. You didn't do anything with Next.js or have to stop or start any development servers. Next.js fetch that fresh content again. That's kind of all baked in and really adds to the developer experience. So if that content does change in the CMS, you get that for free when you revisit those pages. They're rehydrated, and that data is kind of invalidated almost.
Exactly, yeah. So that's why I kind of loading these pages feels a bit slow. They are static, but
Yeah,
what's happening is every time that's firing, next is essentially rebuilding the page to ensure that we've rehydrated the data from the
yeah,
CMS, so we've got the latest data. And that's how I could just save something in there, and then refresh the page without having to rebuild
yeah.
the entire site. That would just
That's
rerun
very
the
cool.
query. So obviously in production that doesn't happen, and you would have to use you use GraphCMS webhooks to trigger a build with your CDN, whether that be Vercel or Netlify, to trigger a new build if there was some content changes.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Well, I think that's been a really exciting deep dive into how the code works and how the CMS work to build and empower something with GraphQL union types. So I'm excited to
Yeah.
see what our users build with it and how they extend it. There's the tutorial that I wrote on creating forms with union
Yeah.
types. So potentially down the line, these could come together and have your nice looking templates and themes and all of your
Oh, for sure,
things.
man. We
You
should.
could have a form component in there that appeared inside
Yeah.
of this box.
I definitely think we should add a contact page to this. Using the kind of
Yeah,
the modeling you've done, because obviously every SaaS page needs every SaaS site needs a contact page. So yeah, let's do it.
cool.
Yeah, so obviously this, like I said, this is still a work in progress. There's still some things we want to add to it. We want to kind of round it out so it's a more of a full SaaS site. It will be a template in GraphCMS. So when you kind of if you go back to your project screen, when you go to create a new project, that will be available here. So it'll replicate the schema for you, and then you can kind of get up and running really fast. There's the documentation on union types as well in our docs for you to dive in. We are working on this constantly. We're really kind of trying to improve our documentation. If there's something that's missing, just let us know in this form that Jamie built. Um, Other than that, I'm going to be creating a lot of content around this once it's done. Some
Yeah,
video content, some tutorials. So yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. This is good to jump on a stream and do this. We're going to try and do this every week. So it'll be myself, Jamie, Jesse, and Carlos kind of rotating every week. I think next week we're going to be talking about versioning, which has just kind of dropped recently. So that'll be
yeah,
exciting. Yeah, we'll probably share the kind of schedule, the upcoming schedule on Twitter and our social feeds.
yeah. Sounds good. Well, I think that's it for today. Well, I'm looking forward to next week and seeing how visioning works and hearing more about that. And then we've got a lot more of these videos planned. So if you have any questions at all, anyone watching, not watching it live, but anyone that's watching this back, feel free to reach out to myself or Jonathan on Twitter, or reach out to GraphCMS at GraphCMS, or pop into Intercom on our website, and we'll be more than happy to kind of walk you through what this looks like and schedule some time to kind of talk about your project and how you can use GraphQL union types.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, Jamie. It was really awesome hanging out. Yeah, and as Jimmy said, reach out to us on Twitter, jump in our community Slack, or just get at us on Intercom. Fabian loves questions on Intercom. So, um, yeah, looking forward to see what people do with union types. And if you've got any questions, just let us know. In the meantime, stay safe. Hope to see you next week. Bye.
Yep.